We appreciate everyone joining us this evening for our journal virtual launch, A Shot for Your Right to Party. Now, here's the managing editor of the journal, Chris Green.
Good evening. As Thane mentioned, I'm Chris Green. I'm the managing editor of the journal. Welcome to the Spring 2021 journal launch event, where we bring the Kansas Leadership Center's quarterly print magazine to life and give you the opportunity to gain insights, engage in thought-provoking discussion, and be introspective about your own leadership and the leadership of others on tough civic challenges. Tonight's event, as Thane mentioned, is A Shot for Your Right to Party, which I think is probably the first Beastie Boys reference we've ever had in KLC history, and perhaps the only one, but hopefully it's puts a little lighter spin on things and let us reflect on an opportunity, that this moment presents in our society for the end of something that has been just so difficult on all of us. This is the 8th journal launch event and the 4th that we've done virtually. So I guess I'm hoping that we are getting as good at these as we were at the ones that we did in person. I so miss seeing you all in the auditorium at KLC, and hope to be back in the Kansas Town Hall at some point in the near future. But until that point, this is the next best thing, and grateful to have you all with us tonight. And one common thread that's connected those events in the Kansas Town Hall and this event tonight is KMUW NPR for Wichita, who is our media sponsor for tonight's event. And we're grateful for their partnership and the significant contributions that they make to informing Kansans. Tonight, you'll be hearing from 3 conversation catalysts to get us started on a discussion about the civic leadership challenges created by vaccine hesitancy and vaccine inequities in Kansas. And you'll also hear from Ed O'Malley, President and CEO of the Kansas Leadership Center, Raquel Thiessen, who's the Director of Community Partnerships at KLC. And if Julia Favis McBride, the Vice President of KLC, comes on, you'll know that something has gone horribly wrong with my technology, but she will be stepping in to fill in with me. And so hopefully that won't happen, but if it does, Julia will be great. And the show must go on, as they say. So to start off our discussion tonight, I wanted to sort of set the framing by just giving some numbers that I think help create the picture, or help give us a direction to creating the picture of our civic leadership challenge right now related to the coronavirus and the vaccines. So I started, in researching this story, we started looking at some numbers at the journal, and how far along are we in terms of being able to reach herd immunity and be able to put all of these restrictions and masks and everything associated with the pandemic behind us. And so I started running some numbers, and math isn't really my strong point, so we're using very round figures here. But there are 2.9 million people who live in the state of Kansas, but we know that not everyone is eligible to receive the vaccines right now. So it's people above age 16. So there's a little harder to find that number, but about 76% of the people who live in the state are over the age of 18. So that's, roughly 2.2 million people who are eligible to receive the vaccine right now. So far, the last I checked on the state's website, we've had 1.1 million people receive 1 dose of the vaccine. And I had to go back and look this up, but the first shots, those were given December 14th, 2020. And that was just 133 days ago. Now, I don't know what you've done in 133 days, but thinking about the fact that 1.1 million people in the state have gone out and gotten one of these vaccinations is kind of breathtaking. And it's not just Kansas. Nearly 141 million people in the US have received at least 1 dose. And if you do the math, that's about 54% of the US population. And 96 million, about 96 million Americans are now fully vaccinated. And if you're looking for a point of comparison, that's more people than watched the Super Bowl this year, which that, I guess, considering how the Chiefs played, that's probably a good thing that there weren't more people watching. So that's when I look at these numbers and when I think about like the civic challenge of vaccinations, like this sort of gives me a side of the story that I don't really see as often as a journalist. Like I think as someone in the media, like, and this is both a stereotype and a truth, that like we see the dog bites man stories. We don't see the man, you know, or the man bites dog stories, not the dog bites man stories. So we look and see, you know, things that are interesting or controversial or whatever. And like, so things that are successful or things that, you know, are sort of like a lot of people are agreeing on something, you know, those don't tend to enter our field of vision. And so I really wanted to push myself to see things in maybe a different way. Now, the journalist in me, you know, sees 1.1 million people, and I can still, you know, think of the challenges in that. Like if Kansans are like other people across the country, then there are 10 to 15% of them who are not just saying no to getting a shot, they're kind of saying hell no to it. And so that's 350,000 Kansans that say they won't get vaccinated. But if you add it all up, that's still 750,000 Kansans, 750,000 adults who might get vaccinated, but haven't yet. And to me, like those numbers like really surface this civic opportunity that sort of exists in our country to engage and talk more deeply about this issue and, you know, figure out a way to energize others so that we can move beyond the pandemic. And so, you know, I think the whole story is, you know, something along the lines or closer to being, you know, what we have now isn't enough to end the pandemic. But this is also an extraordinary time for, you know, for people doing things together and for, you know, taking the same action in hopes of protecting themselves and protecting those around them. It's also a time of significant fear and conflict and tension and a lot of distrust and doubt and all of those things that like we see reflected in our society that are also, you know, transferred into this particular issue about vaccination. And I don't think you can make a social media post about it without having some of that come back at you. And as you know, I see in this number 750,000 that it's an incredible opportunity for civic leadership and for us to rise to the occasion and have this be remembered as a moment where we went from our worst to our best. And so that's what I hope we'll talk about tonight, to talk about this unique moment for our state and our country, to explore vaccine hesitancy and vaccine equity as civic leadership challenges, and you know, spend some time reflecting on our own efforts against the virus this past year. And we'll also introduce you to ways to connect with the Kansas Leadership Center in 2021. Something to remember as we transition into our discussion segment is that this event is being recorded and that portions of this may be posted on social media so that we can allow others to benefit from the discussion. So we're not sure how much we'll post, but we just wanted to make you aware of that as we proceed. And now that like I've shared a little bit about how we're thinking about this event, you know, we always know at the Kansas Leadership Center that we like to get a sense of the sentiments and feelings in the room. So Thane has some poll questions that we're going to go through to just get a sense of like where we are at as a group. And I want to get a sense of how we're feeling about the pandemic. And so would like to know, are you confident or not confident that Kansas is on a course to end the pandemic now that we have the coronavirus vaccines? And we'll give you a couple minutes to answer, but I'm just trying to, you know, gauge the sense of optimism. The vaccines have been sold as this thing that's really sort of our ticket out of the pandemic, out of mask wearing, out of social distancing, you know, some place in normal life. And so we can see from the results that we're a little mixed. We have people who are more confident in it, and some that are not confident, and a whole bunch of us who are kind of unsure. And I could probably make an argument for each of those perspectives, being kind of the one that has the most validity at this point. So the next question, are you enthusiastic or not enthusiastic about encouraging others in your community to get vaccinated for the coronavirus? I mean, like this, when we talk about the pandemic, like, I don't know if any of us really signed up for this idea that we have to influence others, but we are kind of positioned to do that. And one of the things that we explore in this edition of the journal is that our words and our actions and the way that we engage with others can make a real difference. And it's also very risky and difficult. And many of us, when we do that, like, we risk straining relationships and straining ties to family that are tremendously valuable to us. And yeah, so it's interesting. So we're a pretty enthusiastic group. We're willing to go out and do this. Perhaps that's not surprising, considering the kinds of people that go to Kansas Leadership Center events, that we're willing to put ourselves out there. Now, we have one final question. And I kind of want to know, like, where you are positioned, compared to your family, friends, and associates. Are you more or less confident in the vaccines than they are, or about the same? I'm wondering, your social circles, where do you stand? Okay, well, so last vote in, and so we seem to think that we are very similar to the people that we surrounded. So it's sort of interesting, some patterns. We're a little split, more confident than we are not confident, and some unsure. A vast majority of us are confident and eager, enthusiastic to talk to our colleagues and friends and family, people we know in our community, about getting vaccinated. And our social circles are pretty much just like us, by and large, based on the votes in this poll. So before we transition to our first conversation catalyst, I just wanted to check in with Ed O'Malley, our president and CEO, and Raquel Thiessen, our director of community initiatives, and Julia Fabus-McBride, our vice president. What are you thinking about after seeing those poll responses from the people in this discussion?
Yes, this is Julia. I'm thinking that if we want to engage even those 750,000 who are hesitant but not vaccinated, that we are going to have to reach beyond our immediate social circle. And it sounds like there's a lot of willingness in this virtual room to do that, enthusiasm, as you put it in the poll.
That's the piece that stuck out to me too. This is Raquel Thiessen, the enthusiasm, and that feels really good knowing that we're headed into, maybe the next round of Kansas beats the virus. And I would be discouraged if I didn't see as much enthusiasm as I did here in this poll.
Yeah, this is Ed O'Malley here from KLC. I agree with those thoughts. What stood out to me the most, frankly, Chris, was your framing of that 750,000. We might call that the movable middle, really like reaching them as a civic leadership challenge. I love that framing. I think it's a great framing. And I think it's a reminder that energy spent trying to reach the hell no crowd is perhaps energy wasted, but energy spent focused on the crowd of people who can end the pandemic in Kansas is really wonderful to think about. And I love your framing as a civic leadership challenge.
Well, thank you for those insights, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you later and more connection of those insights to Kansas Beats the Virus 2021, which I think you're going to tell us a little about later on. So the cover story for this edition of the journal is about the challenge of vaccine hesitancy. And for that story, our reporter Barbara Shelley, who I believe is on the call with us tonight, talked with two communications experts, Christina Long of CML Collective here in Wichita, and Dr. Brett Bricker of the University of Kansas, who's a communications researcher. And they each have insights about communication expertise on talking about the vaccine with others from very different levels. Brett is the more academic level, Christina is the more ground level, but they're both brilliant at talking about it. They couldn't be with us tonight in person. They both had other commitments, but they did agree to share their insights on video recording. And so they'll appear in a video that DJ Wetter, one of our staff members here at KLC, put together to sort of really prime our discussions on vaccine hesitancy. And so I'll have Fane roll that now, and I think it's a really great video and grateful for their efforts. And this is sort of a really engaging way to start a conversation about this topic.
When Christina Long got the chance to receive her COVID-19 vaccination, she tried to energize others to join her.
I will say I was a little bit ornery though.
A communication professional who owns CML Collective in Wichita, Long has worked with Sedgwick County and the Kansas Leadership Center to connect diverse communities with facts about the pandemic. One of her current challenges is tackling information and access gaps when it comes to getting the vaccine. But even she has faced challenges communicating about the vaccine with people she knows.
There was a vaccine clinic that one of my partner companies who I work with that they offered. And so they were going to make it open to people who I work with. And so I went ahead and I signed up for it, and I encouraged others very close to me. They made the process easy. So let's come on, let's get vaccinated. And even in some of my personal circles, there is that hesitancy. I will share one response. They're like, oh, Christina, thank you so much for letting me know, but I'll just wait to see if you live or die first.
It turned out to be more than just a joke.
They were serious because that person did not come to the clinic.
But Christina didn't give up. Instead, she used a little bit of orneriness and humor to continue the conversation.
I sent a picture that someone took of me mid-blink when I got my shot, so like my eyes were half open. I said that, I said, well, what do you think? They were like, this is not helping me. But anyway, again, and that just shows you can have a little bit of fun. We've got to be able to find, again, some silver linings in all of this sadness that has wrapped through our country as it relates to COVID. And so if you can, again, make somebody smile with a mid-blink shot in order to, yes, I acknowledge what you said, but I'm still here. And you still should consider it.
Christina's story illustrates dynamics that communication researchers such as Dr. Brett Bricker of the University of Kansas are beginning to more fully understand. Stories tend to trump facts, and people want to hear about the experiences of family and friends.
I started writing about vaccines well before the COVID vaccine, and the issue that I was primarily focused on with a colleague of mine, Jacob Justice, was focused on public understanding of the Mmr vaccine, so mumps, measles, rubella, and its ties to anti-vaccination campaigns that largely tied it to autism. And what we found was that the science was similarly overwhelmingly clear. The CDC had done longitudinal studies on millions of children that had received this vaccine and showed no correlation between the likelihood of getting a vaccine and autism. So what we started to study was the patterns of behaviors in the people that were skeptical of the vaccine or downright anti-vaxxers. And what we labeled this phenomenon as is the postmodern medical paradigm, which is basically the idea that people no longer believe that their doctor has more useful information to them than their Facebook friend. And people no longer think that a study done of 1 million people is more believable than a story that they hear on Twitter from their friend. And the whole concept of expertise, in particular in the medical community, has been flattened, where what it means to be an expert in an area is not necessarily something that the public really comprehends, or that large segments of the population really care to really ascertain.
In the social media age, many people like to make their decision based on their own research. And in a world awash in information, it's not hard to confirm your own intuition.
If you search hard enough, you can find someone that agrees with you. And that's actually a very validating feeling, to think my intuition, what I understood about this thing is correct. And that goes back very much to this postmodern medical paradigm where, yes, people want to be empowered to make their own decisions, and they want to feel as if they can shape their own path in whatever it is they seek to do. And in this case, that runs directly counter to some of the things that we need to reach herd immunity in our state.
Recent polling suggests large majorities of Americans are willing to get one of the COVID vaccines or have already received it. But certain Americans are more skeptical than others. For the vaccines to be most effective at ending the pandemic, large numbers of Americans, as many as 85% by some estimates, must choose to get the shots. And it has to be their choice, Bricker says, because mandates tend to harden skeptics' opposition.
My hypothesis is that there is something very central to the American identity, and in particular the conservative American identity, that one should be able to have free reign over their choices, that their liberty is paramount. And we can trace this back to our founding fathers and the Constitution, and that is something that's deeply ingrained in people. And it's almost like people are willing to if they know that it's themselves making a somewhat risky decision, or they rationalize it as a somewhat risky decision, that might be a more acceptable practice for them than having that risky decision forced on them by the government.
That means persuading rather than coercing a significant number of Americans to agree to get vaccinated despite their doubts or concerns. But not every group sees the issue the same way.
Vaccine hesitancy or vaccine skepticism is a very broad catch-all category that fits some very unique problems. So I think that the types of concerns that are faced in the Latin American and Native and Black communities in Kansas are very different than the concerns that are faced by white evangelicals and conservative men in the state. But they have around the same rate of vaccine hesitancy, or the same rate of vaccination. So the messages that will be used to persuade those two populations are very, very different.
For instance, Bricker says community centers and churches could play big roles in communities with large populations of people with Latin American heritages, in part because people from those areas can have historically fraught relationships with government. When it comes to the African American community, among others, Long says it's important vaccines are promoted with culturally responsive messaging. That's something that worked for Long and officials in Sedgwick County with COVID prevention.
When you're thinking about people being receptive to messages, number one, does it look like the message is geared towards them? So who are you featuring in the messages? I'll be quite honest, if we're looking at targeting African Americans with messaging, but there is not an African American that is included in, the brand look or included on the imagery, then is that truly a message that is for me?
Every little thing matters when it comes to advertising, from color schemes to the language chosen.
Are we talking in terms of medical jargon, or are we actually synthesizing and translating that information so that anyone who picks up that message can be able to read it and understand it and act upon it?
But it's hard to persuade anyone if you aren't really willing to try to understand their concerns. There are understandable reasons why some might be reluctant to get the vaccine. For one thing, vaccines followed an unusually speedy path to distribution and use technologies that might be less familiar to some. Others might fear the side effects from a shot more than they do the virus at this point, despite evidence that vaccines are safe and effective and the virus remains harmful to many.
I try to have a conversation pretty much every day with someone about a vaccine. And yesterday, actually, I had a conversation with someone who was vaccine hesitant, and their reason was that they recently had a friend who got the COVID vaccine and then had to go to the hospital because they were nauseous and suffered from dehydration because of that. And that power of that particular example was far overwhelming any of the examples I could have given to the contrary. And that goes back to the power of narrative, the power of intimate interpersonal connections that kind of outweighs the importance of these scientific facts.
But Bricker has developed an approach he's found effective.
First and most importantly, you have to be willing to listen. And that listening might be very frustrating. So for example, if you don't believe that there is a Chinese microchip in the vaccine, but someone else does, you still need to listen to why they believe that and the fears that come with them from that. Step 2 is I never start with a declarative sentence. I always ask questions, and don't assume that you know all the answers, because a lot of these concerns, they have a kernel of legitimacy to them. So kind of when you're asking questions, be willing to say, I don't know the answer to that exactly, and be willing to find a middle ground that doesn't result in, you're not always going to get to from step A to step Z with, them vaccine card in hand in one conversation. So step 1 is listen. Step 2 is ask questions. And then step 3 is to come to an agreement. And that agreement can very easily be, let's agree to have another conversation about this in 2 days. And what I've found from that is that does kind of get to the heart of at least some people's concerns.
Long acknowledges that it can be difficult to put yourself out there because people have so many different viewpoints on this issue.
Being willing to understand that if you do share, especially on social media, you might get some of those negative comments, and that's okay. You do not have to go back and forth with people. In conversation, you don't have to go back and forth with people. You can just listen and acknowledge and validate their concerns by saying, I hear what you're saying, I understand, but for me, this is what worked for me, and this is why. And let that be. And you never know what you could say that could motivate people to put down the battle gear and just listen in order to come to their own understanding, or even to help clarify their position on where they do stand.
Most people just want to be heard and may not fully realize just how common their concerns are and that there's information available to address them.
Some people have a concern that they just don't think anybody else has thought about yet. So they think, I've got this problem and this is my problem. And once they realize that other people out there have thought about this and other people have had conversations about this, then their attachment to that concern begins to lessen.
The bottom line, individual leadership of everyday people communicating with those who trust them matters when it comes to promoting the vaccine. Perhaps even more than the choices of those with high levels of authority or notoriety.
What we're seeing is some of the hesitancy is starting to be combated just a little bit because more and more people are going to get vaccinated, and not just people like celebrities and things like that, but the people who, again, we live, work, worship, and play with in our cities, in our communities.
And Long says leadership on this topic doesn't have to be complicated.
To be kind of a great champion amongst the people who sometimes it boils down to just being comfortable carrying a conversation with them about your vaccine experience. Being basic too, as well. What did you do? How did you go and get an appointment set? Who did you call? Did you go through the internet? What kind of information did you have to have? What did you have to show? What were the lines like? Where did you park? Being quite specific about it. And then also, I know that social media continues to be a predominant force of information. So being willing to share some of that on social media as well in your networks.
The more leadership that happens in the months to come, the more likely it is that Kansans can finally celebrate putting the pandemic behind them.
So thank you to our guests, Dr. Brett Bricker and Christina Long of CML Collective. We're grateful for your participation, and they have seen the videos, so they knew what was gonna come on, so there won't be any surprises. So if you wanna reach out to them or talk to them about anything, I'm sure they'd be delighted to hear from you. And also thank you to DJ Wetter for putting together that awesome video, and grateful for the reminders of listening and asking questions, and really like having good interpersonal reactions. Like, and I think the things that come up in that video are relevant to vaccine issues, but I think they're relevant to so many conversations in our society today. And if we could all force ourselves to sort of abide by those guidelines more often, I think we'd have much richer, more fulfilling conversations about difficult issues, which is really what the journal and what these events like this are about. So that segment focused on vaccine hesitancy. And one of the things about focusing on vaccine hesitancy and looking at this challenge from like maybe a more individual perspective is we can sort of miss the systemic. And we don't just have challenges with vaccine hesitancy, we have challenges with vaccine equity as well in our state. And joining me now is Dr. Ximena Garcia, who's a senior advisor for COVID-19 vaccine equity to Kansas Governor Laura Kelly. And we're going to discuss kind of the state of vaccine equity in Kansas and interventions that could address it this evening. So I think, one of the things to remember is that not everybody who is unvaccinated is that way because they are hesitant. And I understand, Dr. Garcia, you have some slides that you can show us that might give us some insight into, our systemic challenges related to the vaccines in Kansas.
Well, thank you for having me. I can just tell you for a second about myself. I'm a physician. I'm in internal medicine. I'm not a native Kansan, but I've lived in Topeka for 18 years. I went to med school at KU, and my parents are from Chile, and I still have a lot of family there. So we could go to the first slide. I just wanted to spend 2 minutes talking a little bit about data so you can see where things stand. From the governor's office in KDHE, we look at the data all the time, and this data is current as of 4/26. So the data on this slide shows us per 100,000 people that live in Kansas, broken down by ethnicity and race, the numbers of people who have been tested, who have had COVID, who have been hospitalized, who have died from COVID, and finally that have been vaccinated for COVID. So you can see that there's a gap between the numbers of white people who have been vaccinated and the numbers of ethnic and racial minorities. And this is not exclusive to Kansas. National trends are similar. Next slide, please. So this slide shows us the information over time, so over 4 weeks. So this way we can see trends in how we're doing with closing that vaccination gap. And you can see that we're making progress. It's slow. We'd like it to be faster, but we're hopefully things we're doing are working to help close the gap between people of color and white people with vaccinations. So we wish it was faster, and we are working on things to speed it up, but it is improving.
So, Dr. Garcia, what do we know about what's causing this? What are the main drivers of these inequities that we see emerging in vaccination rates?
Well, that's a good question. We spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I think there's kind of two main buckets in terms of drivers of inequity. So there's uncertainty about getting vaccinated, and then there's access to getting vaccinated. So to talk first about uncertainty, I think it has a few root causes, and some of this has been brought up already, but historical mistrust, right? So there's numerous examples of medical dishonesty with people of color, and given the speed with which this vaccination has come up, a lot of people fear a repeat scenario. And also to mention, some of this mistrust is not just historical, it's ongoing. I've had a lot of conversations with people of color who say that the way they're treated currently by the medical system is a factor. So it's not like that happened before and we've moved on. And then also, like you mentioned, disinformation and misinformation. There's so much inaccurate information floating around, and it's really powerful at dissuading people. And then the second big driver is access, and that also has a few causes. So physical access limitations. So the existing health infrastructure, unfortunately, overlooks vulnerable communities and communities of color. Proximity. Vaccination sites can be far from vulnerable communities who can't easily get there. Transportation issues, hours. Clinic hours are generally built around the Monday through Friday 9 to 5 schedule, and that really doesn't work for a lot of people. And then finally, in terms of access, there's access to information. A lot of us take technology for granted, but within vulnerable communities, there's not always access to internet, and not everybody speaks English. So it really does make it hard to access vaccination details.
I did want to address a question that's in the chat from Jeff.
Sure.
And he asked, is there any data that's available for vaccinations on individuals with disabilities and cancers? And I know that I've heard stories of challenges that people have experienced. So I was curious, is there a way to track that, or some way to record that?
That is a really good question. And it's something that was just kind of on my radar like lately. And so I don't have those statistics in front of me, but I could get them hopefully, and I can share them with you. And that is something we're looking at.
So what do we know right now about like how we best reach vulnerable at-risk communities? Are there best practices emerging, new possibilities that we're looking at for things that might help us reach the 750,000 or whatever that might be willing to get the vaccine but haven't?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that. Well, so we have things that we've put in place that we're working on, and I want to talk about them. But then there's also a lot of things that we're thinking about, and I would love for this group to spend, some energy like thinking about it for us. So KDHE and the governor's office work together, and there have been a few initiatives to try to reach vulnerable at-risk communities. And one, of course, is our efforts with KLC, with Kansas Speaks the Virus and Voices on Vaccination program. We've also launched the Kansas COVID Equity Task Force, and that brings together leaders from across the state to inform efforts and to be messengers to their networks. We've launched also a forum that we're calling the Equity Forum, and that helps KDHE coordinate partnerships between community organizations, local health departments, and providers to support vaccination efforts. KDHE has also been working with local health departments to prioritize vaccination efforts in areas of high social vulnerability. So they actually just launched a tool called the SVI Explorer on their website, where you can actually look county by county by census tract and see how your county is doing in terms of vaccination, what are the at-risk vulnerable populations. Anyway, so it's super interesting. I encourage you to check it out. And then finally, a lot of you talked about launching consistent, consolidated, accurate communications from multiple levels, including statewide campaigns, targeted campaigns to specific communities, that was brought up, and broad release of resources for reuse by community partners. And then in terms of what else can be done, so things that we're thinking about. So one thing is that we're no longer constrained by supply. We have enough vaccine. And now what we're trying to focus on is how do we get this vaccine out to people? And what we need is creative ways to get it out there. So for example, is there a door-to-door strategy that could work similar to the way the census information was gathered? And how would that look in your neighborhood? Leveraging local institutions to support vaccination events. For example, county fair season is coming up. What could that look like? Could there be booths at county fairs? What about libraries? That's a network all across the state. How could we use the libraries to leverage vaccination? And then establish clubs like Rotary. You know, the Rotary had a big hand in polio vaccination promotion, et cetera. So like, how could we use Rotary to help We're also working with faith-based and other organizations to sponsor more vaccination clinics. That's something that we're really working on, especially faith-based communities. And then finally, what about incentives? Like, what would drive somebody to get vaccinated? A t-shirt, a gift card, and how would that be viewed by the community? Would that be viewed as a good thing or not? So those are a lot of things I'm wondering about, and I'm excited to think that you all might spend a little time thinking about it. And that's all.
So the sense that I get from your comments, like to put it this in like KLC terms, is like, so a lot of like what's gone with that on vaccination has been a technical challenge, but what we're talking about now feels more like an adaptive challenge, and that like for Kansas and the rest of the country to rise to the occasion and then get the level of vaccination that we need to end the pandemic. Or is what you're saying that we're going to have to get creative?
Get creative, yeah. And it's a ground game now. It's like, it's not going to be fast. It's not like putting up a vaccination clinic and people come. We're going to have to figure out how to go community by community and what's the best way to do that in this state.
So is there anything else you'd like the folks on this discussion to think about as they get into the discussions on Kansas Beats the Virus 2021?
I can't think of anything else, but I just want to say that I'm grateful for all of you, that you're all there, that you're worried, that you're thinking about it, and that we need your help, because it's a big task. And the way Kansas works, we're so different in terms of, it's not a one size fits all. So creative solutions are going to be part of the answer.
Well, thank you so much for joining this evening. Thank you for your comments and your work on this issue. I do notice that we have a question in the chat about where we could find the data that you mentioned. So we'll hopefully maybe talk offline to make sure that question gets answered. Yes, thank you again, and looking forward to conversations in the future about vaccine equity.
Thank you, really appreciate it.
So this sort of concludes the journal part of our journal launch and the discussion about the content of the magazine. And now we'll be moving to part 2. But before we do that, I did want to leave us with a couple of questions to think about. And if you feel inspired to answer them in the chat, please go ahead. I'd like for you to think about what you've heard about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine equity, and just maybe share something about what you're thinking about after hearing those comments. I'd also just love to hear more about the sense of like, how do we characterize the civic leadership challenge we face as a state when it comes to beating the virus? And hopefully, like the journal content, that this portion of it will leave you, if you don't have answers right now, thinking about this in days and weeks to come as we transition into KLC's efforts to address the virus in 2021. And so now I'm going to turn things over to Ed O'Malley, who you met earlier, and Raquel Thiessen to tell us a little, to help us reflect on our efforts to beat the virus, and also explore what our roles might be going forward to address some of the issues that we've talked about earlier.
Great, thank you, Chris. And Dr. Garcia, thank you. It's been great to get to know you over the last couple months and to work with you, and we appreciate you being with us tonight. We know you have a tall task, and I hope you know that we're doing whatever we can to be helpful to you. Raquel, it's good to be with you. Our job is to try to help, transition our thinking from about what the journal, introduced in this issue, and towards like, so what's it mean for each and every one of us? And everybody, as you know, Raquel, everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of the folks here tonight were connected to efforts to quote unquote beat the virus over the last several months, especially that surge of activity that so many incredible Kansans came together to make happen between Thanksgiving and Christmas. 851 or whatever it was, action projects, action meetings between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Who would have thunk it, you know? But a lot of the folks involved with this were intimately involved with that effort. And I know you were as well, Raquel. And so what we thought we'd do for everybody is Raquel and I are going to have a little bit of a dialogue, and we're going to pose some questions to you. And we hope that you'll answer those questions in the chat box. And you know, we want to give you permission to think with your fingertips. You know, don't worry about having the perfectly constructed comment. Just share what's on your mind. My guess is your comment will provoke thoughts from other people and lead to more comments and more thinking. So our hope is that you'll type freely and frequently as we ask you a few of these questions. Raquel and I might offer our own answers to these questions. We might also look into the chat box to pull out some of those answers. But Raquel, but before I throw the first question your way, I'm just kind of curious what's on your mind after hearing, you know, the first part of the program today. What's on your mind about the vaccines, about this challenge we have? I'm just curious where your mind's been the last 49 minutes since this got going. What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm really thinking about all of the faces that I see here tonight and how many familiar friends and partners and relationships there are. And even though this is a daunting challenge, I'm encouraged by all of our friends here. And I've really been thinking about that this first hour. And I loved the part, and I mentioned earlier about the enthusiasm that most people in here share to do this kind of work. And that feels really amazing. It feels hopeful.
You know, Raquel, it is daunting. So the encouragement is good, and we're gonna start with a question that is along those lines here in a minute. But I just want to reflect on what you said. It is so daunting, and I was thinking about Steve's comment further up in the chat box. Steve Henson's comment. By the way, Steve, hello. Say hello to the family for me. And you know, that comment, and if those of you haven't seen it, you might scroll up and take a look at it. To me, what it conveyed is the complexity of trying to move this forward. Like there are so many moving parts with the pandemic itself. And then you engage kind of like humans and human error and default behaviors and all the stuff that makes accomplishing anything hard. And then you toss in maybe a little bad luck here or there, and it just can become overwhelming. So it is daunting. And our hope is, though, that we'll help create some uplifting feelings in this part of the conversation as well. So Raquel, let me ask you this question.
You bet.
And this is the question we want to, if Thane or somebody could put this question in the chat box, that would be awesome. The question is, what are you most proud of in your efforts to beat the virus over the last year? Everybody on this Zoom has been involved with something. You were involved with Kansas Beats the Virus, or you were involved with your own effort related to slowing the spread of the virus or increasing people getting tested, or maybe now promoting the vaccine. So we'd love people we'd love you to brag on yourself just a bit. Okay, we're giving you permission. In fact, we want you to brag on yourself, your organization, yourself, whatever makes the most sense for you. Brag on yourself a bit. And it will inspire others. So light up the chat, please, with what you are most proud of related to your efforts to beat the virus over the last year. Raquel, what's your answer to that question? What are you most proud of?
Well, first, I'm struck by the fact that you asked us to brag, because usually KLC is about asking, what are your vulnerabilities and triggers, not what your strengths are. So
we're going positive tonight, Raquel. We're going positive. At least the start. I can't promise we'll stay there.
Well, we're going to give it a go. So I'll dig into this. And I think that there are two levels to what I'm most proud of. And one is something personal, and the other is just about the organization, the Kansas Leadership Center. Personally, Kansas Beats the Virus consumed my life back in the tail end of November and December. And I really discovered that I could dig a lot deeper than I thought or imagined I could when we first launched this effort. I couldn't have imagined that I had that much to give, and was really struck that whole month about just the connection to the common purpose, which is sort of connected to the thing about KLC that I'm most proud of. Is I love the idea that we were this living example of the competencies and principles that we talk about all the time, and mobilizing others to make progress on a shared purpose. And I think what we did in December was just that. We mobilized lots and lots and lots of Kansans around a common purpose. And that felt pretty darn amazing. Maybe it was the first time KLC had leaned on our civic engagement capacity, and to do it with such gusto, with such amazing partners and participants, just really speaks to Kansans and what we're capable of.
Well, and Raquel, real quick, I just want to say in front of all of our guests tonight, I mean, you were an incredible workhorse during all that. I mean, the amount of hours you put into making that happen is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you. And I love hearing you be proud of it, because you should be. And we all are proud of that effort, and especially the part you played. I'll answer the question too, but I want to call out just a couple of these. Matt O'Malley, no relation that we know of. Matt, good to have you with us. Matt wrote, I'm proud of promoting contactless grocery options in Crawford County. I'm confident it lowered the number of COVID exposed shoppers in stores. You know, COVID positive shoppers in stores. You know, I live in a big enough city where there are all kinds of, grocery delivery options and things like that. And we were taking advantage of those before the pandemic, but once the pandemic hit, we went kind of all delivery all the time. Think how huge that is for what Matt helped create in Crawford County. That is awesome to create those options, especially for those who are most vulnerable, who then had the option, because of Matt's work and his team's work, of getting their groceries, which they need, in a way that didn't expose them to the virus. So Matt, thanks for sharing that. And I just want to lift up Tamara's too. In the face of uncertainty and not knowing what would make progress, collaborating with others to try. I think that is awesome, because what we know about adaptive work is no one exactly knows the way forward. So the exercise of leadership on an adaptive challenge sometimes is just trying with others to figure out a way forward. Like that alone. And Tamara, I love you lifting that up. Thank you for lifting that up. My answer to this question, Raquel, and then if there's one you want to pull out of the chat, please do. And then I've got another question for you. But my answer to this is, I'm really proud specifically of how with Kansas Beats the Virus, from the beginning, we were clear that effort's for everybody. And people thought we were nuts. People said, are you kidding me? These conversations about masks and all they're so polarizing, they're so political, they're so volatile in our communities. And we said, look, we think we can devise a way to have these action conversations and action projects that actually focus on what we can agree on rather than where we disagree. And I think probably 99% of the action projects and the action meetings reflected that. Let's focus on the common ground and go from there rather than focus on the types of discussions where we need our battle gear. I love Christina using that line. Let's put the battle gear down. And I think we did some good stuff there. Raquel, any you want to lift out before I ask another question to the group?
Well, I would just tag on to that. And I love what Steve said there in the chat bar. Loved having a way to let people try to help. I think that's what Beat the Virus did the first time, and what you alluded to, and Steve backed up, is that we were finding ways to let people into the conversation, let them into the work, as opposed to keeping them out. Yeah. And it was about bringing all voices, and that was amazing.
Yeah, I love that. And I got to use that just to kind of lift up a couple big ideas about solving really tough societal community challenges, right? You've got to find a way for the people themselves to do the work, right? You have to. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I see so many familiar faces who mobilize so many people to engage over the last year, is so much of the pandemic, people have been told, and this will sound critical, I'm not trying to be critical, but I've been told, stay home, wear a mask, stay home, wear a mask. Pretty passive, right? And those were the right instructions. I'm not saying those were the wrong instructions. But what I think has been really powerful, to Steve's point, is people need to be engaged. So, history buffs will know about the Battle of Dunkirk during World War II, where the British Army was stranded on the beaches of France. And English citizens sailed their pleasure boats across the channel to rescue the army. Everyday people doing their part, or back also in World War II, everyday people having their victory gardens in order to kind of grow their own produce so that more food supplies could be sent to the troops. The history is full of examples of the people themselves taking up the work to make progress on the toughest challenges. And I think Steve is touching on that. I think it's really powerful. Okay, Raquel, I got another question for you. By the way, this will be another question for everybody. So Thane or somebody on the KLC team, if you can drop this question in the chat box here in just a second. Here's the question. Raquel, where do you worry you fell short or wish you would have done more? And I'm not trying to get you to beat up on yourself, Raquel, but I think it's one of those things where it's adaptive work, right? Sure. So some of the things we try aren't going to work. We're gonna go to the plate 10 times. If we're lucky, we're going to hit the ball 3 out of 10. So those times when you missed, when you look back in the last year and you think about your efforts, where do you think you fell short, or where do you wish you would have done more? And if we'd love to have people chime in the chat box too. Again, we're not trying to make any of us feel bad, but we're trying to just really create a spirit of, we got to learn together, we got to experiment together, we got to keep getting back on the horse when we fall off. I'm mixing all kinds of metaphors. That's a bad idea, but it's late, so you got to forgive me. But Raquel, what do you think? How would you answer this question?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. As focused as I was in December on all of the things Kansas beats the virus, I failed to have really powerful and meaningful conversation with the people closest to me. And, I look back and think, gosh, what a missed opportunity that was. Just in terms of what we were doing, what we were trying, how we were mobilizing Kansans, I wish we could have made it more seamless for all of the people that were participating. And I know we've said 100 times we were building the plane as we were flying it. But if you get the chance to look back and wish you could have done something differently, making it seamless is something that's on my mind. But I think also, I really wish we could have captured more of Northwest Kansas. We're talking about, beating the COVID-19, not for sectors of Kansas or populations in Kansas, but for all of Kansans. There was parts of Northwest Kansas and maybe even Western Kansas that we didn't get to as much as I think we could have. And so that's on my mind. It's certainly something I think we have to pay attention to moving forward.
Yeah, Raquel, thanks for sharing that. And those of you who are, adding things to the chat box, thanks for sharing as well. The pandemic's not over, and we got to reach a lot more of those 750,000 people in the movable middle in Kansas to get it over in Kansas. So I say that just because there's an opportunity for us to acknowledge maybe where we fell short and now work on that and to work on that together. And I just want everybody to know KLC would like to be your partner, would like to help you in that and be a resource for you in that. Just want to lift up a couple of these, and I'll give my answer as well. Heidi mentioned I often succumb to just wanting to cocoon and avoid contact with people. Heidi, thanks for giving voice to that. I'll connect my answer to this question to what you just said here in just a minute. Amy, I wish I could get my mom to get the shot. And Raquel, that kind of connects to some of what you were saying. I mean, sometimes this work is hardest with the people closest to us. And one thing that we all might think about is what might it look like for us in the coming weeks or months to really lean in to those closest to us, but do it using those skills that Christina just talked about in that video, for example. I think there's something there, and I think some of those skills actually give us some tools. So great stuff. My answer to this question is it connects to Heidi's. I think when the pandemic hit, KLC, as CEO of KLC, we got so focused on kind of completely reinventing kind of our operational model We made some early overtures to the state to be helpful around the pandemic. But frankly, I think then I kind of personally did a bit of what Heidi talked about. I think I kind of cocooned, wanted to kind of just focus on our internal organization and our partners from a leadership development perspective. And looking back, I wish we would have initiated those conversations that led to Kansas Beats the Virus. I wish I could have found a way to initiate them sooner. I didn't come up with the original idea. It was a joint, idea with the Secretary of Health and Environment. But I wish, rather than having those discussions the week before Thanksgiving, it may have been the week before Halloween or the week before, Labor Day. At the very least, just so we wouldn't all have been stressed out when we were trying to make it happen. So that's on my mind. How about Raquel? Anything you want to lift up before I give you the last question? I'm going to ask you to answer in front of everybody.
Yeah, this is what has me thinking about is not just the importance of the message, but the messenger, and just having to pay attention to that. It may be the same message that we're all communicating, but it's about figuring out who's the right messenger to share that, and who can mobilize and energize people. And sometimes it may be you, and sometimes it might not. And just being super conscientious and making some conscious choices about that is what comes to my mind here.
Yeah, and again, I don't want this to be too negative. I mean, what you all have been doing, whether you are formally involved with the Kansas Beats the Virus or the Voices of Vaccinations efforts of KLC, or you were doing your own thing, you should be proud of it, and you've done a lot. One way to think about it is, there were some people who mobilized some other people, who mobilized some other people, who mobilized some other people, and before you knew it, Kansas, by late last year, was one of the leading states in the nation at the downward trend in positive cases of COVID-19. So there's a lot to be proud of. Let me give you that last question, Raquel. What role do you see yourself playing in efforts to beat the virus in 2021? And if we could drop this question in the chat as well, what role do you might, for the folks in the group, you might answer that personally, or you might answer that organizationally. You can take it whatever direction you want to, but it would be great to hear and to read people reflect on what role are you going to play to slow the spread of the virus, to end the pandemic in 2021. Raquel, how do you answer that? What do you think?
So this hits home for me at a real personal level, because as I have conversation with family members, I'm realizing that I'm one of very few that's willing to get the vaccination. And I loved, somebody said earlier, never start with a declarative statement. And I think that's probably what I've done. I'm thinking about my folks, my brother, extended family, that I probably need to change my approach. And so I intend to do that as 2021 rolls on. From my perspective as a staff member here at KLC, my role is certainly connected to Beats the Virus 2021, this effort that we're launching. Much like last time, it's about engaging and mobilizing partners, and that won't be any different for me this go around. So if you haven't heard from me yet, get ready, because that's my role, and you can, just know that I'm coming for you.
Raquel, I love that. And, it is, it's one of those things where each of us figuring out what our piece is, and, what's our piece in our family, what's our piece in our social circles, what's our piece. Some of us, work professionally in ways where we can engage on this. So Raquel and I, we work at the Kansas Leadership Center, and the Kansas Leadership Center has decided to spend energy at mobilizing alums to help, increase vaccination conversation and help us get to herd immunity. But not everybody, has that opportunity to have their professional work tied to this in this moment. So hearing and reading how people are focusing on what's this mean for them, in KLC programs will often say things like, so what's the exercise of leadership look like for you on this issue? in the future. And that's another way of thinking about this question. And I love seeing some of the answers come in. Yeah, Roger, you definitely are a connector, and one of the most amazing connectors in the state. And I know you're doing your part already, but keep it up, man, and let us know how we can be helpful, and let us know how we can learn from you in that way. Phil, KPMC will use our connections again to form small groups like last time. That is awesome. We love that. We know the power in small group. So many great examples here. For me personally, I think it's, we're so proud of what happened with Kansas Beats the Virus, and we know that it can be done better, it can be done smoother, it can be done easier, it can have more impact. So trying to channel my energy and use my role to help make that happen is where I see fitting into this. Raquel, any you want to lift up before I ask you to give some final comments, Raquel, about Kansas Beats the Virus here in just a minute, and then we've got one final question we'll give to the group. So for the group to know, we're 10-ish minutes away from winding down here, but certainly by 7:30, that's our end time stated on the invitation, but we might get done a little bit before then. Anything, Raquel, you want to lift up that you're seeing?
I'm just really struck by the theme of people being connectors, and I keep seeing that in the chat, and maybe it doesn't come out in words exactly like that, but that's what people are thinking that their role is. That's what we're asking people to do. And I think that's just really powerful when we're using different words, but we're meaning the same thing. We've got to go connect with people.
I saw somewhere on there in the chat box, somebody mentioned it's hard to know if somebody's hesitant or not. And what that comment made me think about, and you're right, Raquel, we're all connectors. And so we can also choose to connect with people who are more hesitant. And I thought of politics, my own personal background in politics. I used to serve in the legislature and worked for a governor. And in politics, one of the early lessons you learn is you've got to ask, you've got to know, where are people at? Are they voting for you or are they not voting for you? Where are they on this vote? And there are ways to do that are really respectful. But you're not going to win many campaigns in the world of politics if you don't put some energy into really trying to figure out, how do I know who my voters are? Who do I know who the other people's voters are? And I don't need to worry about them. And how do I know who the movable middle is, the folks who I need to influence? And I think each of us as connectors, trying to think about, this isn't politics, this is something different, but trying to think about, how do we be as intentional about knowing who those movable middle people are, and then connect with them? That feels really critical. And you know what, if they can figure out how to do it in political campaigns, surely we can figure out how to do it in something like this. Raquel, I want to tee up just a little bit of overview about Kansas Beats the Virus going forward. Obviously, we'd love to have those of you who are with us tonight, we'd love to have you involved. If you were involved last time, we'd love to have you back. If you weren't involved last time, we'd love to get you involved. There's a lot going on. It's about to kind of officially launch again. Raquel, what should people know?
Well, I would love it if Thane or Julian or somebody could tee up this slide, because I think this covers 4 of the key points. We are moving forward with Kansas Beats the Virus 2021, and many of you know that we're launching this effort this week with informational meetings, connecting to partners, much like we did last time. So this isn't just an idea. This is, we really are moving forward. And I love this slide because it points out 4 key things that you have to be aware of. One, the purpose is, it's big, but it's simple. It's end COVID-19 pandemic in Kansas. Let's just use plain language, and we did. That's what we're hoping for. We certainly can't do this without partners. We did it with partners last time, KLC, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and folks just like you. And like I've said before, there are so many of you here this evening that were with us back in November and December, and really look forward and invite your participation again. The strategy is this: we have to mobilize Kansans to generate local solutions. And that isn't much different than last time. We may have focused a lot back in December on getting to 1,000 meetings. we're still going to have meetings. We can't get away from that, but we really want the focus this time around to be about action projects, generating more local solutions. And we see this happening in surges. Maybe there's 5 or 6 surges, but what we know for sure is that this first surge is to increase vaccination among the movable middle. And there will certainly be a lot more information coming out, especially when the Kansas Beats the Virus website, it goes live again next week. Will help folks come to an understanding, or at least understand what KLC is thinking about in terms of the movable middle. I think this is the analogy I like is that Kansas is right here in the middle of the United States. And when I think about the work that we did in December and the impact that was happening across the state with COVID numbers going down, maybe Kansas is the movable middle. Maybe we're just smack dab in the United States and we're the state that's going to move this forward. And people start looking at Kansas differently. And so, that's my little side aspiration about movable middle. But I think any way that you can connect to Kansas Beats the Virus 2021, there may be a common purpose, but why are you doing it? What's your personal aspiration for this? Like I said, we're recruiting partners. We're going to have meeting conveners again. We have to have action project team members, and all of that will be coming out here in the next 5 to 10 days, starting with a meeting first thing tomorrow morning. And Thane, if you could cue up the next slide, I'd like to just, I want you all to have Stacy and I's name and number and email, and I don't. There's some hesitation here, but Stacy Schmidt, who's on the here with us this evening, Stacy and I are leading the effort to recruit partners and action project conveners. If you want and need more information about how to get involved or be connected to Beat the Virus 2021, reach out to Stacy and I. These are phone numbers that we're going to answer, and these are emails that we're going to pay attention to. Just because we know that we need you, we can't do this. We can't go to 2021. We can't activate these surges without all of you. And get a hold of us. It's the right thing to do. Stacy and I, it's the right thing for us to do to be this accessible to you. So that's where we're headed. The focus really is about action projects moving forward. We're not trying to get to 1,000 meetings in the next 30 days. That's not the plan. Maybe we're gunning for 1,000 action projects by the end of the year. I'll just put that out there. But we've got some more time to do it. And we think the pace or the cadence of the work will be a lot different than it was the last 6 weeks of 2020. So that's where we're headed. There's a lot more to say about it, but we just wanted to give you just a quick snapshot of where we're going and what 2021 might look like.
Raquel, thank you for that. And I see a question there from Patty in the chat. Will we be sending out information on what's next after this call tonight? So how would you answer Patty's question, Raquel?
One, I would say, Patty, email Stacy or I, and we'll get a hold of you. But there are meetings this week, starting tomorrow morning, informational meetings. Quickly send us an email and we'll get you that schedule. There's one tomorrow morning at 8:30. There's one Thursday evening at 7, and another one Friday morning at 8:30. And these are 45-minute, pretty quick-paced informational meetings. It doesn't commit you, it just gives you more information about how to be involved in this next round.
Awesome.
And we'll send you links so that you can connect with us.
That's awesome. And Raquel, if you wouldn't mind real quick, put in the chat box just your email address, just as if somebody didn't get it down, or put Stacy's if you'd rather them, fill up Stacy's inbox. But I know you both are sharing all that. But yeah. So Patty, get in touch. Like once you make contact, we will keep you informed and find ways to connect you. I want to ask a final question to the group. We'd love you to light up the chat box. here as we wind down. And I'll ask the question, and then I want to offer some closing comments. The question is, what do you want KLC thinking about as we relaunch Kansas Beats the Virus? We know our role is just a tiny role. It's just that we're a piece in a really big puzzle of all sorts of amazing people exercising leadership to end the pandemic. And we'd love to know what you want us thinking about as this relaunches. What advice do you have? What do you want us thinking about? What do you want us dwelling on? What do you want us making sure we do, making sure we don't do? What? Give us your advice as we relaunch this. We launched Kansas Beats the Virus 1 so fast and so furious that we're proud of it, but there were so many kind of things in the air, so many moving parts. We know it wasn't as smooth as it could be. So we have a lot of things that we want to have on our mind as we relaunch. We want to know what you think should be on our mind as we relaunch. So please fill up the chat box on that. And Thane, thanks for putting that question in. Before I offer my final comments, I want to thank Chris Green and his amazing team at the Journal. Such an incredible job, as always, framing up the tough issues. The Journal really exists to describe the issues that need much more leadership in our state. We're not saying people aren't exercising leadership on the issues, but to really describe the issues of the day that demand more leadership from more of us, and also to lift up examples of people exercising tremendous leadership. Chris, you do it so well. Your team does it so well. Thank you. Thank you for giving us another great launch event. Here's my final comment for tonight before we close things down. According to the data, there are about 750,000 Kansans who would be in the movable middle. If I followed Chris's numbers right, I think I got that right, Chris, 750,000 in what we might call the movable middle. The pandemic doesn't end until enough of them get vaccinated. I mean, that's the way it's going to end. Like it won't end otherwise. This virus only is going to end once herd immunity is achieved. And with the knowledge now that having COVID once doesn't mean you can never get it again, like the way you stop this, right, is by reaching enough of those people. And these are good people, those Kansans, those 750,000, those are good Kansans that are doing good things. And how we can listen, support, be there to help them have the information they need as they make the decision that they need to make. To me, that starts to sound like a bunch of people exercising a lot of leadership to mobilize people across the state. Thank you, everybody, for your piece of this puzzle. And please let us know at the Kansas Leadership Center what more we can do to help you activate your leadership, to help you activate the leadership of other people that you're connected to help us as a state make as much progress on this darn adaptive challenge called the pandemic as we can. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.